This is the Bruchim podcast, the only podcast in the world dedicated to Jews who think differently about circumcision. Welcome back to the Bruchim podcast. I'm your host, Eli Sargon, and joining me today from Los Angeles is Jessie Kahnweiler. Jessie, welcome to the Bruchim podcast. It is such an honor to have you here.
Ellie, I'm so happy to be here. I love talking to other Jews because they always get my last name right.
Did I say it right?
Of course. I don't have to worry about it. It's not
Awesome.
like weird. It's not that like Gentile pause, Cornwheeler.
Yeah. So Jessie Kahnweiler is a filmmaker whose work has been featured everywhere from the New York Times to the Cannes Film Festival. Jessie wrote, directed, and starred in The Skinny, a dark comedic series based on her 10-year relationship with bulimia, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won a Webby for Best Series. Jessie's short film, He's the One, also premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. And in her new documentary, which we're going to be talking about today, Just the Tip, Jessie explores the topic of Jewish circumcision. Welcome to the Bruchim podcast, Jessie. And my first question for you is, what brought you to this topic of circumcision?
I know. I'm still asking myself that, like 2 years later, what the hell am I doing? It was like a very natural progression, personal thing. Like most of my projects are, it just started with like a question or like an intrusive thought. But my boyfriend, who I'd met during COVID, we started to get serious. We moved in together. We're talking about wanting a family, and he's Gentile. And so this question of like, I was raised Reform, but I'm very culturally, spiritually Jewish. Judaism's a really big part of my identity. When we have kids, I want them to be raised Jewish. And so the first parenting decision you need to make as a Jewish parent, if you have a boy, is, are you going to circumcise? And my boyfriend is not circumcised. So it wasn't like a given that it's something that we would do. So I was just like, man, this is really stressing me out, and there's not an easy answer. And there's like a lot of thinking and talking to people and researching and stuff that I want to do on this topic. So I was like, well, I might as well just make a film about it.
When I think about your work, what stands out to me is that you seem to be overall drawn to some pretty dark themes, and you use humor almost like a kind of misdirection for your unique brand of insistent chutzpah. And what that suggests to me is that in your mind, talking openly about the hard stuff is important. Am I getting that right, or am I completely off base?
Oh, I feel very seen. I feel very seen and validated. It's so funny though, because I'm a pretty like happy, silly person. And so it's funny when you look at my work, or when I tell people about, oh yeah, I do films about eating disorders and sexual assault and circumcision and, these darker topics. I don't know. For me, it's just, maybe it's how I am as a person, that I just kind of laugh through the hard stuff. And, as a filmmaker, like making films it's so hard. It takes like every cell of your body and your being. And so it's like, if you're going to do it, for me, at least, like if I'm going to commit to something, it has to be something I really, really give a shit about. And so, yeah, that's just kind of been my path.
As we've covered, this isn't the first taboo subject that you've dealt with in your work. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are the similarities and the differences between the circumcision topic that you deal with in Just the Tip and some of the other controversial and taboo subjects that you've dealt with in previous work. Like, if you could give me like a compare and contrast, what to you seems similar and what to you seems unique here?
That's such a good question. And I would say for this subject, it was, as much as I can say, oh, it comes from a personal place, I do not have a penis, that I know about. So this was the first project that I've worked on where I really didn't feel like I wanted to approach the subject with respect and reverence. And I was a little bit more of an outsider, like, who am I to make a movie about circumcision as a Jewish woman. It's not from my experience, in contrast to somebody like yourself that's lived it, that's had to, go through this whole process. I felt much more like an outsider looking in. Most of my films are really like female centric, female issues, not that that's so black and white. But I really wanted to approach the subject matter with, I wanted to get in there and roll my sleeves up and get nitty gritty, but I also wanted to have respect, because I quickly realized, no pun intended, like what a sensitive subject matter this was. And, I just had been like waiting to get men to share their feelings with me and open up to me. And I was like, wow, this is a subject matter that's so untapped, that literally affects like every single human being with a penis. And we don't really talk about it. So it just quickly became just a really fascinating process. But yeah, tried to be, definitely finding that balance of using humor, but also trying to be, and there was real like trauma here, and there was real vulnerability, especially in my subject. So I really tried to approach it with sensitivity.
Yeah, I think you really succeeded in that. And one of the sort of ways that you do that in the film is by having surrogates, as it were, of men who have actually sort of had that personal experience that you haven't had with this. And talk a little bit about what that was like for you as a filmmaker. And, do you feel like you found the right people?
Yeah, I mean, that's where like the Hashem of it all comes in. And you're just like, once you start, my phase is always just like research for a couple of weeks, months, and then start going into the world and talking to people. And it led me to people like you. And then it starts to feel like the movie kind of takes on a life of its own. So I definitely feel like I could be making this movie forever. But I do feel like with the time that I had and the resources that I had, I talked to some really amazing people on all sides of the issue. And that was what was really challenging, I think, once we got into the edit, because, who I chose to feature and how I chose to feature them, that was going to be saying a lot. And like, ultimately, what do I want to say about the subject matter? For every botched circumcision, I'm sure there's hundreds that are just fine. And so if you're only showing, do you know what I mean? The editing was really a really, really involved, long process on this one. But yes, I feel very grateful for my subjects and how they kind of came to me. I mean, honestly, thank God for Reddit. I never thought I'd say that, but
yeah, it's interesting. And I'll speak a little bit here from my perspective as a filmmaker, because you can get into situations where people are literally counting the number of pro and con people that you put on screen and how much screen time did every person have, which, like, from the creative side is like insane. That's like an absolutely insane. Like, if you were making a film and you're thinking, I need exactly this number of minutes to go to this side and this number of minutes to go to that side, you're not making art anymore. You're doing something else. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Maybe it's like PR or something. Maybe it's more politics than filmmaking. But yeah, no, I think you did a marvelous job of like getting a great balance of perspectives, and again, getting the right surrogates, because you don't have the embodied experience that someone who's been circumcised would have had, and having those people represented on screen. I think you did a great job with that.
Well, thank you, Ellie. I mean, I on the same token, like, as much as it was, being an outsider to the subject matter, I also felt, because my DP was a female, my editor was a female, I also felt like having the outside perspective did give me an interesting kind of into the world. Because first of all, like, I had this curiosity as a human. I had this curiosity and need to kind of figure it out as a, future Jewish mother, potentially of a son. But I also had the distance from it. Like, I didn't have my own penis affected. And, it's a lot. Like, you hear me ask my dad in the film, like, have you ever thought about your circumcision? It's like so many guys, Jewish or not, have never even thought about this. So the fact that I was kind of able to come in with a perspective, being a female, I've had my experiences with bodily consent, unfortunately, as most females have. So I did feel like there were some opportunities for some common ground.
No, absolutely. And I think what you're putting your finger on here, and not to put too fine a point on this, but like as a prospective Jewish mother, this is relevant to you in a very deep way, because ultimately in our culture, it's the parents who make the decision.
Yeah.
So even if it's not something that you've experienced in your own body, it's directly relevant to this part of your life. And it's a big decision that I think a lot of people kind of don't take very seriously.
Yeah, or they don't, or it's like, we'll deal with it. It's like maybe just subconsciously, like, I don't want to think about that. So, like, we'll deal with it when we have to. But then, you know, when you're giving birth, there's probably a couple other things that you're doing as well. So, it's like giving it, I wanted in the film, I wanted to give circumcision the weight it deserved for my future child, because it is such a big decision. And I think our society is like so weird and prude about it in a way, and like awkward, that nobody really wants to talk about it. Cause like, who wants to talk about elective surgery on a child, on a baby? So yeah, I just was shocked that there wasn't more information, resources, or just conversations about it, Jewish or not,
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were like basically you're the only organization of your kind that I know of.
Bruchim, yeah, in terms of a Jewish organization that talks about it from that perspective, for sure. It's fast. I've been talking about this subject for a long time, and it's always fascinated me the manner in which the taboo kind of functions socially and culturally. And I think that's what you're sort of feeling here, which is that for whatever reason, this is actually a very difficult topic for people to talk about, because the cultural taboo almost always kind of chooses the let's just avoid it trade-off. I think maybe it's because it has something to do with genitals, and that's also kind of a taboo subject in our culture. But I also do think that there's something about, like you were saying, there's something about the violence to, you didn't use the word violence, I'm using the word violence, but there's something about violence to infants that I think makes it particularly difficult and uncomfortable to talk about.
And boys too. It's like, that was the big learning experience for me, making the film and dealing so many, my subjects all being men and all having gone through this. I'm like, wow, men are not really given. I mean, who thought I'd be sticking up for men, but it's like men are not given the space to talk about this. It's a joke. It's like, don't be a pussy, suck it up. It's not a big deal. Like, so that was really kind of sad and shocking to me too, that like most men aren't upset about it because they didn't even know that was an option.
You were talking a little bit before about how this touches on trauma. Can you talk a bit about what you discovered in that realm?
Well, I mean, it's like such the T word, I don't know. It's like, it's like everybody uses it. It means nothing. It means everything nowadays. But I did encounter men that, had trauma around their circumcisions, whether getting them later in life or having them at all, and how it affected their sexual dysfunction or their identity. And just this idea of something being done to your body without your consent. I personally can relate to that. And I'm always seeking, as a filmmaker and a person, to look for the similarities in the shared human experience. So that was something where I felt like, as a woman, I can it's not the same exact thing as something like sexual assault, but I can relate to that. And that was an interesting connection that I wasn't expecting to find.
Your Jewish identity is a big part of your brand, for lack of a better word. I'm wondering if you were nervous about the impact of questioning circumcision on your career.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Well, my manager's not a rabbi that I know of. I wouldn't say my career, but I was definitely nervous about, it's like, I'm not trying to piss anyone off. That's never my goal. I'm not, I know my work I can be seen as rebellious or provocative or whatever, but it's truly never my intention. And I don't want to piss off like any of the Orthodox rabbis or the Moyles or anybody that I talk to in the movie. Like, I seriously respect them so much. Like, I have friends that are Orthodox. I've love multiple Orthodox rabbis, and I'm not trying to piss anyone off or offend everyone, but I really always just lean back on my very Jewish value, which is just like the number one thing of Judaism is to question things. Like, the Torah is like a little bit of text followed by like 50 different arguments over 200 years between people. So to me, it's like so big, the word Israel means to wrestle with God. It's so baked in to question these things. And so to me, it feels so Jewish to question circumcision. Nothing feels more kosher to me, honestly.
Absolutely. And of course, at Bruchim, we strongly agree with that sentiment. It was so interesting to watch you interact with the Orthodox characters in the film, because one of the dynamics that I think I was picking up on, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you were obviously there and I'm just watching it, but I feel like some of them were trying to take the opportunity to evangelize to you a little bit, to sort of bring you back into the fold. Did you feel that at all?
Yeah, but I'm like always feel that. Like anytime I'm at Pico Robertson and I'm like with a bunch of Orthodox, like I'm always just like, oh, I should do that. I should just like have 12 kids and just like be an Orthodox woman. Like there's always like a part of me that's like, would that be easier? Would that be an easier life?
Oh, so what you're saying is they're picking up on something real.
No, I mean, I was waiting to be convinced and brainwashed. I was like waiting. Like I actually wanted a good argument that connected logically, medically, spiritually, all of the above, so that I could bring that back to my boyfriend, because that was the whole jumping off point. I was like, I don't know, we should do this probably because I'm Jewish. And he's like, okay, but why? And I'm like, because that's like what we do. Okay, but why? Because we do that because we're Jewish. Okay, but what is that connected to? It's not, eating kosher or one of our, not celebrating Christmas. Like I was like, oh no, this is like your body. This is a big deal. So I was waiting for that answer. And, there was a couple times in the film, especially with one of the rabbis who I did really connect with on a spiritual level, where, talking about the history and the continuity and what it means to be Jewish. And anytime anyone brings up the Holocaust, I'm like, okay, all right, I'm listening. But yeah, you'll have to watch the film. But I was waiting for that moment. That's all I'll say.
I was going to ask, because your boyfriend makes a really compelling argument against infant circumcision at the very beginning of the film. And what I wanted to know was, in the entire process of making the film, did you hear anyone make a compelling counter argument, whether religious or medical or?
Oh, yes. 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 Yeah. I mean, much more spiritual though. Like to me, it was pretty obvious from the jump. I mean, no offense to non-Jews and non-Muslims too, but if you're not Jewish or Muslim and it's not in your religion, like I don't understand why anyone's still doing it. Like it's been proven, like by the American Academy of Pediatrics, like this is not a necessary procedure. The pros outweigh the cons, like all the information's out there. So I don't, really understand what the argument is for doing it. But if you are Jewish, like I said, all the emotional baggage and our history and our tradition and our identity and being part of the tribe and anti-Semitism, like these are all very compelling, emotionally weighted arguments that for me, it was worth exploring. So I did hear, I mean, yeah, that's why the argument's so tough, because depending on who I was talking to, I was like, you're right.
Did you bring that back to your boyfriend, and did you guys talk? Like it would seem to me that all of those kinds of arguments would be difficult to make to someone who doesn't come from that background. In other words, it all rests on a kind of shared history or a sense of, a spiritual belonging, all of these sorts of things. And I would struggle. I've been thinking about and talking about and making work about this for 20 years. I would struggle to articulate that to someone who didn't have that connection in the first place.
Yeah, no, it's totally annoying. And I think I was annoyed. Like I think I wanted to circumcise because I just didn't want my boyfriend to be right. I'm like, who's this Gentile telling me what to do? And these are, relationship dynamics. But I think ultimately, and circumcision is one of the examples right now where, it's all about Israel, talking about Israel, but being with a non-Jew has made me so much more Jewish because nothing is given, nothing is assumed. And I'm always questioning and thinking and having to kind of examine like my beliefs and what's important to me and why. And it's a lot more work than just being with a Jew where you're like, oh yeah, obviously, you know. But for me, it's like I'm in the diaspora in my house, you know, and I do believe strongly in Jews being in the diaspora. You know, I think it's part of our path is to kind of be that island and be kind of like representing and, you know, fighting for what I believe in. And then going, well, this I don't really care about. This to me is not, you know, what makes me Jewish and stuff. So ultimately it's really good. And he's patient and he's curious too, you know, and I don't know, just being with a Gentile in general, I'm like, I'm just grateful to be Jewish, if that makes sense. Like I'm grateful to have something, even if it's something to rebel against or something, you know?
This doesn't happen in the film, and I think you were very wise not to come to any kind of conclusion. But in the tension between the emotional arguments that you were just articulating and the ethical arguments that Rufus articulates at the beginning of the film, where does that leave you? Do you live with the tension between the two? Did you resolve it in your mind and in your being? Do you feel like one trumps the other? You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the question. I feel like once I have a boy, you know, once I have an actual penis growing inside of me, then I'm going to have to really come to that hard and fast conclusion. And I have an idea, I think, of what I would do, but you know, I'm just leaning on that tried and true Jewish ending of just like ending with more questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not going to tell us what you would do.
No, I'm not. Cuz the film is more conversation. You know, it's more I mean, I know personally what I would do, but I like keeping it open for the audience.
Yeah, no, I think that's wise. And I think always, as a filmmaker, like to err on the side of leaving room for the audience as opposed to telling them what to think. I was just wondering on your side, like, this is a podcast. This isn't the film. This is
Right.
supplementary. This is
Right.
extra
Okay,
features.
you want the hot take. I mean, to me, I think it's pretty clear watching the film where I mean, my kind of whole thesis with the film is like, don't project my stuff, like my neuroses and my stuff onto my child's body, you know? Like if I'm nervous about them being Jewish enough, that's my thing to wrestle with as a parent. And it's not about just like doing something to okay, that get that mitzvah done if I'm not feeling like connected to it, you know. And that goes for circumcision or anything else. I think if you're going to circumcise, it has to be something. Well, see, I don't know, some people just do it and it's not a big deal and that's fine for them too, but to me it is a really big deal. So I think if you do it, you got to really be like connected to it, you know, like it's got to be meaningful to you. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but for me, it would be.
So, like, not in the hospital, like as a routine procedure, but like with a ceremony and that kind of thing.
Or not. I mean, it could be in the hospital, but just you feeling like, okay, I'm really doing this because it connects like mindfully, like this really connects to my Judaism and my heritage. And it's meaningful to me because X, Y, and Z, you know, like it's like some people homeschool their kids. Like I would never, but that's like very, you know, just like all things with parenting, like just what's the intention behind it? And that was the biggest like mind fuck to me that like, wow, we're doing this procedure and we're not even like thinking about it. We were not questioning it. We're not pausing to be like, why are we doing this? We just do it. And so it goes and so it goes, you know? I think it's time to think about it and question it.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned in this process? Like, what really took you by surprise that you didn't expect?
Well, I think that I really do want a kid. I think that was at the end of it, I told my boyfriend, I'm like, I think I really do. Like, I think I made this whole film to really kind of reckon with and process like wanting to become a mom and the weight of what it means to be a parent and have that responsibility. And he was like, duh, you know, because the film was like 2 years in the making. So it was like, kind of started it kind of as a joke. And then by the end being like, oh yeah, okay. It was kind of a way for me to process, not that one can ever fully process becoming a parent, but on a personal level, that was it. And, just, I think the surprising thing of just like the male sensitivity and empathy for this very male experience, and the trauma, and how something that is so hidden and not talked about is so deep, and it connects. Some men it doesn't, and that's fine too, but some men it really, does leave a scar. I keep making all these bad puns, but it leaves a scar, and that should be taken seriously. And I think that's, it's just like circumcision is just a joke, we're just seen as a joke. I remember like the first tweet I tweeted about, like, I'm making this documentary, and I had like a picture of a pickle and all, like, kind of just having fun with it. And people were like, this isn't funny. Like, it's not just joke, it's not jokes. It needs to be taken seriously. So I have a lot more respect, I think.
Jessie, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people watch Just the Tip? And more generally, where can people find your work?
Yes, my work is all on my website, which is just my name.com. I'm also on Instagram way too much, so you can find all updates on the film there. It's streaming online. I will be sure to give you, maybe you can link on Vimeo or whatever. But yeah. Come say hi. Come to Instagram. There's just lots of pictures of me and my cat.
Next time on the Bruchim podcast. What are some of the communication strategies that we can employ when we're trying to talk to other people about these things that can be used to avoid triggering a kind of like a defensive reaction from people so that they can be more receptive to this information?
As I do in my book, I describe the context of why these practices, where some are used and some are not used, the ones that are more natural and satisfying to the infant. I start with that. Once they hear that, then I'm sure they get that I'm not asking them to feel any self-blame or guilt. And if I check on that and make sure that they get that message, then I feel more confident about proceeding with other information. And it's important not to say too much without checking, get a response. How do you feel about what I just said?
Thank you for listening to the Bruchim podcast. If you like what you've heard, please go on over to our website, bruchim.online. That's BRUCHIM.online, and consider supporting our organization. We're a 501c3, so all donations are tax deductible. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to email us at info@bruchim.online. Lehitraot.